Welcome and thank you for joining us. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. It's an honor for Ryerson University to host the Canadian launch of Mr. Patterson's memoir, My Political Journey. We are very grateful to our alumna, Donna Chinlo Chang, for bringing this opportunity to us. Donat and her late husband Ray have been extraordinary friends of our university. Their support of students in need is truly commendable. And the G. Raymond Cheng School of Continuing Education at Ryerson is a wonderful legacy to their commitment to education. Canada and the Caribbean share a deep connection. Toronto and Canada are home to one of the largest diasporas of Caribbean people, who play a vital role in building our country. I know that today's event will only deepen the Canadian-Caribbean connection, and I look forward to the great program that is ahead. My congratulations and thanks to Mr. Patterson for permitting us the honor of hosting this very important launch. Thank you.
Good afternoon, fellow diasporians. It is my pleasure on behalf of NCB Group to be sponsoring this book launch for the most honorable PJ Patterson. Well, most of us wouldn't realize that Mr. Patterson is the longest standing Prime Minister in Jamaica's history. And he charted his own course based on the person that he is, because he followed his prime ministership succeeded the charismatic Michael Manley. And we know how charismatic Mr. Manley was. But Mr. Patterson, he charted his own course by being himself, by showing personal strength, demonstrating shrewdness, academic brilliance, and exceptional political savvy. His vision for Jamaica was underpinned by the necessity to have infrastructure, and that was how he saw Jamaica as being coming out of into the new developed state. He maintained a high degree of relevance today, internationally, and in Jamaica. So Mr. Patterson is someone who we can truly be celebrating. He is a true son of the soil. So why is NCB sponsoring this event? Well, we're sponsoring it because of the contribution of the most honorable PJ Patterson to nation building, to building a better Jamaica. It's an opportunity to showcase, as I said earlier, someone who has contributed, someone whose life's work is one that we should all be proud of, and whose dedication to Jamaica is a role model for all of us. So for those reasons, NCB is most proud to be a sponsor of this event and here in Canada today. Thank you. Good evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I have the honor of opening the main stage event of this program. In April, we were looking forward to officially launching in Canada PJ Patterson's memoir, My Political Journey. When I raised the idea with President Lashmi, he was thrilled to host a gathering in Toronto at Ryerson University, my alma mater. However, we had to put off our plans as Mr. Patterson was seriously injured in an accident. Mr. Patterson, we are all so relieved that you have fully recovered, and we're grateful for the opportunity, despite this pandemic, to gather across time zones and national borders to acknowledge your great dedication to public service for Jamaica and the Caribbean and the ripple effect it has had globally. In preparing today's fireside chat, we asked Mr. Patterson to draw on his life lessons and provide perspective on the future of the Caribbean in light of the confluence of a global pandemic and the renewed call for social justice worldwide, particularly for Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color. Further, how do we, as a truly global community, build a renewed vision for the Caribbean and its diasporas? A vision that encompasses keywords in Jamaica's national anthem: justice, truth, respect, wisdom, and love. Principles that have embodied the works of our nation's leaders. This event is a wonderful opportunity to renew our own commitment to these values, which are needed now more than ever before. PJ Patterson was Jamaica's sixth and longest serving Prime Minister from 1992 to 2006. In addition to his lifelong political service, he has had an equally distinguished legal career and is a recipient of numerous academic and international honors. Upon his retirement, he founded Heiss Consults, an international consulting firm, and he remains active in public life. He also currently chairs the Ramphal Commission, engaged in a study of migration and development in the Commonwealth. And in June 2020, Mr. Patterson was named Statesman in Residence at the PJ Patterson Center for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy, which was officially launched at the University of the West Indies. Joining Mr. Patterson is Dr. Luz Longsworth, a prolific leader in her own right. Dr. Longsworth has over 25 years of experience in academia and business throughout the Caribbean. She is chair of the UWI Press Board, which has published this book, principal of the UWI's Open Campus, and pro-vice chancellor of Global Affairs. As a community leader, Dr. Longsworth has worked with at-risk, or as we say, at-rise youth in the Caribbean, and has served on several community-based organization boards. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Most Honorable Percival James PJ Patterson and Dr. Luz Longsworth.
Good evening to everyone joining us for this conversation, this dialogue with our distinguished author, Mr. PJ Patterson. First, let me thank Mrs. Donette Chinloy Chang, the team from Ryerson University, and all who have made today very possible. Mr. Patterson, it's such a pleasure for me. Of course, the UE Press is thrilled to have had you as our distinguished author, but I know that this launch, this Toronto launch, has been long in coming, but one that you have been longing for. So tell us a little bit about why this launch is so important to you.
We launched the book in Jamaica, in North America, in the Caribbean, and in London. But for me, the launch series could not be completed without including Canada, a place where I have so many friends and so many pleasant remembrances. Unfortunately, I met in a mishap the week before I was due to leave. I had been very much looking forward to the events of the 21st of March because it would have given me an opportunity not only to launch the book, but to meet so many friends who now reside there. Let me add my quota of thanks to those who have made this broadcast possible, and particularly I must mention Mrs. Chinlaw Chang and the principal and the fraternity at Ryerson. Others have contributed to making this a reality, and I thank them all.
Well, indeed, the world today is so different from the world that we were in at that time when we anticipated the launch, Mr. Patterson. So I guess I'll start by asking, how are you? How is your family doing with all of the challenges of COVID?
When I met in the accident, the expectation was that I'd have been ready to travel to Canada for the launch of the book. In fact, personally, I'd been looking forward eagerly to the completion of 2019 in the expectation that 2020 would be a better year. But I had not anticipated COVID-19. Its effect is reverberating throughout the entire world. Rich nations, poor nations, to people within countries at the highest level, presidents, prime ministers, COVID-19 does not discriminate in any way. And therefore, it was impossible for me to come to Canada, but we have had to resort to this virtual launch, and it's a very great pleasure for me to be able to participate.
You know, one of the things that amazes me is that having read the book pre-COVID and now reading it during the COVID pandemic, just how relevant so much of your life story, your experiences, in fact, almost predictive. Your book opens, for instance, in the period of the 1930s and 40s with, you know, the struggle for self-determination in Jamaica and the Caribbean. And that links somewhat with what is happening today. How do you see some of those experiences reflecting in what is happening with, like, the Black Lives Matter movement and the real search for social justice?
The intention of writing was not so much an autobiography about me, but a narrative from my perspective of what had happened since I happened to be born and bred in Hanover, a few miles away from the Froome factory, which really opened a new chapter in our fight against colonialism and the legacy of slavery. And I had expected in writing the book that we had seen it all. I had no idea what was to happen by the pandemic. As I've said before, none are immune, and it threatens not only the health of people, but also the health of our economies, particularly in the developing world, with the accumulation of debt, with the fight that we have to make against hunger, against poverty, against ignorance. And what this is showing is that no part of the world is really immune from what is happening in another part of the world. We keep on talking about a global village. This is perhaps the clearest example that what happens in one place can have deleterious effects throughout the world. And it's really an opportunity, I would almost call it a call of urgency, that we have to come together in the fight against disease, against climate change. People are starving when in other countries food is being thrown away. And I think the reason why there's some relevance between what is in the book and today is because it's a single story of the evolution of the world, and certainly in my case, speaking about what has happened in Jamaica, the Caribbean, and our interface with the international community over many years.
I guess as Martin Luther King says, we're all part of the huge design. So everyone is connected in some way. And one of the things that I noted in reading your book is your consistent commitment to this unity through international organizations, through collaboration and partnerships. Tell us a little bit about your struggle, your journey in trying to link the Caribbean with the rest of the world.
We in Jamaica and the Caribbean have had a colonial experience. And very often, we don't appreciate how deleterious it really has been in the nature of the evolution of the nations within the Caribbean. We made an attempt to come together in the West Indies Federation, and that proved to be a failure. Countries did not regard it as the answer to our problems. But I think we were smart enough to realize that although we wanted to exercise our own sovereignty, there's a common interest in practical areas of collaboration which we have exploited through the Caribbean Development Bank, the University of the West Indies, and of course our position in negotiating with the rest of the international community. The book speaks about the breakthrough which we made with Europe in the Lome Convention. And we went into that negotiations, first of all, taking a decision that the Caribbean was going to put forward one position. And we managed to help coax other countries that there was some benefit to them if we worked together. So out of that, the ACP group was formed. And my experience in those negotiations really exposed me to the linkage of the problems that we face. I also had the opportunity of participating in a conference which very few people remember to have occurred, after the increase of oil prices, there was a meeting in Paris, the Conference on International Economic Cooperation, that brought together representatives of the developed world with representatives of the developing world. And we, despite our best efforts, were not able to reach a consensus, partly because the developed countries insisted on maintaining the primacy of their situation without consideration of our interests. The book takes very special note that most of the international institutions, the Bretton Woods institution, UNESCO, and the United Nations, are really the byproducts of the conquest in the Second World War. And at that time, we were colonies, not only in the Caribbean, but throughout Africa. I think the only two independent countries in Africa were Ethiopia and Liberia. And we have been saying for a very long time, we need a new framework for international relationships. There needs to be a new architecture. And what we're insisting on is the right to be present at the negotiating table to determine the design, to fix the outcomes that include the interests of the developing countries and the interest of the developed world as well. And I think the pandemic is more than a jolt, more than a timely reminder of the urgency of looking at the world as a whole. And it is in that context, and for that reason, I have decided, with the support of the University of the West Indies, to establish a center that will promote interaction, that will secure common policy approaches between the 14 countries of the Caribbean and the 46 nations of Africa. We constitute, when we act together, 1/3 of the members of the United Nations. That gives us power, that gives us negotiating clout. And we can't stop crying on the need and the justification for a new world order until we have some signal that the developed countries are ready to enter into meaningful dialogue to secure that.
Mr. Patterson, you spoke of the new center, and not surprisingly, it's with the institution that I know you love a lot. No bias here, of course, the University of the West Indies. What about the University of the West Indies is really so special to you, and you think is so important to the region?
I entered the University College of the West Indies in 1954. At that time, it was the only campus for the entire university. And present on that campus were students from Trinidad, from the Bahamas, from Bermuda, from Belize, and then, of course, Guyana. In fact, I met a Guyanese lady who I married and who is the mother of my 2 children. That university was conceived to be the shining light in the Caribbean, which would radiate its learning into wider spheres. We all went into that university insisting on, I would say, the primacy of the countries from which we originated. But during the course of time, most of us moved from being Jamaicans, St. Lucians, Kititians, Guyanese, to be regionalists. It wasn't something that the university taught in any of its formal subjects, but it was a process within that environment. And from then, I have always felt that I owe something to the university. It's an attempt to give back so that succeeding generations can benefit from the intellectual discourse and that vision of a Caribbean civilization. And so I had no hesitation when I was writing the book to do it through the university press, as this university celebrates its 70th anniversary, and the proceeds of that will go to my endowment fund, which places an emphasis on regionalism, so that a scholar who benefits from the endowment fund will be afforded the opportunity of spending a semester or 2 on a campus other than that which he or she belongs to. I think the university has faced many challenges, none more so than the present time. Governments can no longer provide the huge sums that afford and allow subsidy of education. And we don't want to go the elitist route. In fact, for me, where as a Caribbean people we want to be heading is in the building of a knowledge economy with the use of our abundant creative skills in the arts, in sports, in entertainment, with tourism perhaps as being the biggest single sector in the economy. Now, as I speak of tourism, I have to recognize how vulnerable it can be. Usually, we are coping with natural disasters. Now, we have to face the pandemic. So we have to find new ways of meeting this challenge. And thanks to the advances of technology, we are able to use the tools and facilities which are available to communicate and to interact, although we are not in the same physical space.
As you speak of education and the effect of the pandemic, I know that many of our young people are worried about their future education as things have changed in terms of the traditional college environment. How do you see education evolving with this new pandemic? Is it really the end of education? Do you see the technological divide, particularly in our countries where we don't have the adequate resources, as something that could possibly, affect our young people's ability to
Well,
learn?
we have to look at it in different groupings. Certainly, when it comes to education at the infant school and primary school and secondary school levels, we have to recognize that e-learning is not always accessible to several children in several households because the online facilities simply don't exist in that area. Certainly, especially in a country like Jamaica, known for its hills and its valleys and its beautiful terrain. So I think, first of all, we have to look at where face-to-face education is absolutely essential so that the available spaces in schools can be used for the educational thrust to which we have accustomed. At the university level, there are several students who no longer can afford the contribution to the cost of their studies. That's an area where we must give back. If each person was been a beneficiary of the teaching at the university, gives some thing back, either in terms of money or in terms of services, it can make a tremendous contribution. I think we have, in looking at the future of employment in the Caribbean for sure, that's the direction in which we have to go. In creative thinking, in the design of tools and equipment that are essential to communications and development in the world of the future. And therefore, the commitment to education cannot be compromised.
Absolutely. I know that you have had a life of commitment to education, and we certainly feel that commitment in the University of the West Indies and are very grateful to you for what you have been giving back to the university.
I think I should mention that I'm very conscious that a large number of our best students were educated in Canada. And that was largely because of the limits of the university college then, and the fact that at one time we only had 3 faculties, so that people who wanted to engage in engineering or economics, or for that matter, law. My legal studies took place in London because at that time when I attended, the university didn't offer any training in law. So I'm mentioning that because I'm hoping that through this medium, they could be encouraged and stimulated to make a contribution, a meaningful contribution to the educational programs which are being run in the Caribbean. And that's why I have agreed to serve as a patron of the home giving for the university. And we're coming up to the 75th anniversary in a few years' time, and we have to make it special, or as Miss Lou would say, a bunanunosier.
Bunanunosier, that's right, definitely. You know, in the book, you know, it shows the diversity, the range of experiences that you've had politically in terms of your diplomatic career all throughout Jamaica's history and the Caribbean's history. If I were to ask you to tell me which was perhaps the one experience that you've had that stands out in all the things that you've done, you know, which is the one that you would share with us has really made an indelible mark on you?
That's a
hard question.
For people who love cricket, that's bowling a googly. I will mention one. A lot of people hearing this conversation were colleagues of mine in different schools in Jamaica. And as I said, they went, they studied, and in many cases, they stayed. Canada owes us a lot. And I hope the Canadian government would recognize that it's more than a question of affording them honors, but it's really a signal that we ought to have a partnership in the provision of knowledge and the inculcation of skills which are necessary not only in the Caribbean, but in Canada. And I would mention this. When we were in secondary school, we were taught English history and European history. We never were exposed to Caribbean literature. But many of us in our time were encouraged to learn about Haiti and its successful fight against the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. And we know that one of the leaders of that Haitian revolution came from Jamaica. Also, those of us who did literature remember Wordsworth writing about Toussaint L'Ouverture. So for us, there was always something special about Haiti. Fast forward, when I became, during my prime ministerial years, we know about the attempts to build real democracy in Haiti. And time wouldn't allow me to recite all that transpired. Suffice it to say, there came a time when Aristide, the president, was abducted from Haiti and taken against his will to the Central African Republic. I found that to be repugnant. But what really angered me most was that when the plane with Aristide landed in Antigua to refuel, the declaration on the manifest was no passengers, cargo only. And I said, no matter what it cost, we came across the Caribbean as human cargo. And so long as I had breath, and so long I controlled the levers of political office and in relation to my colleagues in the Caribbean, it is something we should denounce. It's one of my most difficult periods because we were threatened for having the courage to stand up. But it had to be done. That's one of the things that stands out most. But in a general sense, what pleases me most is when I am in public and somebody comes to me to say thanks for something I have done, which very often I never did in a personal way, but it was done for persons in a group. Like, for example, you go into the pharmacy and somebody says, thanks for what you've done. It's because of the drugs for elderly program. And we have placed a lot of the emphasis. The premium is on the development of our people to be the best that we can be and to build a nation that we are proud to call home.
I think that should be put in big capital letters for all leaders, to build nations and to become the best that we can be. I don't know how you managed to do so much over all these decades, in terms of public service, and yet, and you mentioned cricket earlier, and yet have such passion and not just interest, but involvement in areas such as cricket and the music industry. And I want to spill some beans, a little bit coming out of the book about your involvement in music, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I went to school with a number of musicians. Chester Harriott, who was a renowned organist, went to Calabar, and Carlos Malcolm and myself were in the same group. And we would use some of our time to fool around the piano. And at one time, I was the drummer in the pickup band.
I didn't know that.
So there's a love of music, which frankly I inherited particularly from my mother. When I came back to Jamaica, and I was always involved in politics, but I never had entered what I might call the competitive test of running for elections then. And there was this group. And I have no hesitation in saying it is the greatest aggregation of musicians which has ever been gathered or which will ever gather in Jamaica. And that was a group called the Scatterlights. And I ended up as being the manager. Rather than earning any money from it, which was never my intention, I spent money to make them available. They captured a rhythm and a sound from which we have gone to rocksteady and then reggae. And moving now into politics and the link with music, when we ran the campaign, which resulted in the victory of Michael Manley and the PNP in 1972, it was preceded by what we call bandwagon. And we had all the best musicians moving from one point of Jamaica to another to play to massive crowds. I'll share something with you. It had to be done before the election was announced. Why? Because at that time, there was a ban on live music at election periods. Why was that so? The British were afraid that we were using the drums to communicate messages of rebellion from one hill to another. One of the first things which we did when we won in 1972 was just to delete that ban from our legal history. I would say that period reflects one of the most enjoyable periods of my life. And happily, in retirement, I have a good collection of music which I enjoy in my spare time.
So clearly we know that your favorite is the Scatterlights, right?
That's right.
But second favorite?
Oh, well, on the jazz side, there would be the big band led by Sonny Bradshaw, and there was Carlos Malcolm's band and the Afro-Caribbean rhythms, and we cannot forget in that Byron Lee, who really encouraged the professionalism in music. And I think out of that has come the fertile ground on which people like Jimmy Cliff. Just last month, somebody sent me a copy of Jimmy Cliff performing at the Sombrero Club on Malines Road with Byron Lee. Jamaica abounds with talent of high class. We've lost one of the great ones, Toots and the Maytals, but we have some up-and-coming musicians that will continue to make sure we are on the front stage.
You know, one of the things that strikes me as you speak, Mr. Patterson, is just how much your life has been intertwined with developments of all kinds in Jamaica. And I can sort of imagine that little boy that you describe in the book, leaving, you know, Hanover and going into Montego Bay and then going to school. And I think of all the young people out there, many of whom, you know, would probably be watching us tonight, looking at the world and thinking, you know, things look so bleak for them, that, you know, the pandemic has created so much uncertainty. And I just thought as we, you know, we wrap up, I know that you have grandchildren, right?
Sure.
And they're
Four.
probably
I'm blessed with four.
four grandchildren.
2 from my son and 2 from my daughter. A boy and a girl each.
Each. Good balance, right?
Really?
Well, it would have to be if it's PJ.
Yes.
So, you know, speaking to your grandchildren and to those young people out there, you know, who are looking at this world and saying, well, where is my place in this? You know, what words of hope, of that would you want to say to them?
I'd say very simply, they need to know the struggles which previous generations faced, and to what extent we were able to make a dent in dealing with those problems, because I'm not going to pretend that everything has been resolved. But I think what we have to say to them is, the future is yours. You have to shape your own destiny. Let nobody else decide for you what you should do, nor put any limits on the positions to which you might ascend. Whatever you are doing, be the best that you can be.
Thank you so much. And that's a nice way to end, because that's what you have always been, the best that you can be, and it has been to the benefit of Jamaica, the Caribbean, and indeed the world.
I'd just like to take the opportunity of saluting my many brethren and sistren in Canada. And at some point or the other, we're going to deal with this pandemic. Oh, yes. And I'll see you then.
That's right. So we'll see you then. And that's the note that we're going to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Patterson, for sharing, you know, your personal as well as your public self with us. And, you know, we really, on behalf of the UE Press that I chair, want to thank you for, you know, giving us this wonderful volume that has won an award and is our best seller at the moment of the UE Press. So we really, really are pleased to be associated with this.
There are a number of people who contributed to this book who are now living in Canada. In fact, the editor of the book, Miss Hearn,
Oh, yes.
and Rachel Manley and Keith Ellis, my classmate, were very kind to contribute to the production of the book, and I thank them all.
And thank you for sharing your life with us. Thanks so much, Mr. Patterson. I enjoyed what they call this fireside chat, although we don't have any fireside, but at least we had a very pleasant drawing room, and it was nice to share these moments with you. Thank you, and thanks so much to everyone who has joined us this evening.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this special broadcast of the Canadian launch of PJ Patterson's memoir, My Political Journey. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a rich and fascinating detail about the journey of a man who served his country and its people with pride and dedication. In keeping with his commitment and care for youth, all proceeds from the sale of the book will support student scholarships at the University of the West Indies. Almost 49,000 students at the UWI are now in great need of scholarships and welfare. Please buy the book. I enjoyed every page. And please look out for an email with links on how to purchase. Finally, I wish to thank all the sponsors: Ryerson President Dr. Mohamed Lashimi, NCB Financial Group Chair Dr. the Honorable Michael Leachin, Dr. Luz Longsworth, Chair of the UWI Press, and Vice Chancellor of University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. Thanks also to Caribbean Airlines, Heist Consults, the Chase Fund, and UWI TV Global. My very great thanks to the teams at Ryerson University and the University of the West Indies for curating this event around this critical conversation. Best wishes to you and yours. Be well, and remember, please buy the book.
What a gathering this is. A convergence of celebration of the journey to excellence. The celebration of a legend, an icon of the global Caribbean. PJ Patterson, now known as the pride of Jamaica. Celebration of a memoir of a political mastermind being launched in a forum hosted by one of the finest universities in the world, Ryerson, led by the brilliant, acclaimed president, Mohamed Lachima. And doing so in the company of the energetic, committed, courageous Dr. Donnet, one of our best and brightest. The political journey of PJ is in fact a metaphor that sets out the journey of the UWI, simultaneously reflecting the journey of one of its finest alumni. Beginning, of course, in humble circumstances, but with a consciousness committed to caring for all around and those to come. Courageous. This memoir reflecting the systemic strategic plans of a young, maturing man to achieve excellence both within the local context, but projecting that consciousness, that commitment to the global world. In many ways, the rise of the University of the West Indies and the journey of PJ Patterson are an expression of an integrated process by which Caribbean democracy was able to push away from the colonial scaffold and emerge with an indigenous Caribbean consciousness determined to find its best dignified place in the world. But doing so, always within the context of respecting the roots of origins, knowing from whence we came, understanding the circumstances that we have inherited, but imagining a future of excellence and dignity. And in each moment along that journey, thinking about those to come, to inspire the next generation, to keep moving within the context of the rise of Caribbean civilization. The UWI is now classified, ranked as the finest university in the Caribbean. We have also been ranked within the top 1% of the best universities in the world within our age cohort, the Golden Age universities, and also ranked in the top 1% of the finest universities in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Times Higher Education have ranked us, therefore, with a triple first in region, in hemisphere, and also in age global cohort. But this triple first of the UWI effectively mirrors PJ's own triple in the context of Jamaican politics. UWI, its iconic alumnus, PJ Patterson, inspiring dialectically each other over the decades. Because of this, the future looks bright for our university, illuminated as it has been by PJ Patterson's journey. And it is this journey to the future, so effectively characterized in the logic and in the pedagogy of PJ's memoir, that sets out the roadmap for UWI as it continues on its journey to be among the best regionally and globally. This journey we see in PJ's narrative, the finest, most dignified foreign minister of our region. And it was out of the conception of his imagination as a foreign minister that we have come to see the Caribbean's place in the post-colonial world. The language, the strategy set out here in this memoir, within PJ's own imagination of what he expected for this region on the global stage. Our task in UWI has been to implement his vision, to ensure that his vision is rooted within this university's own strategic plan. This is a moment of convergence. One of our finest alumni presenting to his alma mater a vision, a roadmap, a journey to the future. And so we give thanks to our hosts. We celebrate once again our president of Ryerson, our friend Mohammed. And we also celebrate Donnet, our leader, for bringing us all together to celebrate this convergence of alumnus and alma mater. Thank you.